Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rick Hackett from Community Planning and Permitting staff. We are now recording. You may begin.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Ukile, and I'm chairing this meeting on behalf of the Board of Adjustments. It's 4:01, and this July 6th meeting of the Board of Adjustments will now come to order. I'll start out with a brief announcement. Due to COVID-19 concerns, this meeting is being held virtually. Information on how to participate in the virtual meeting has been posted on the Board of Adjustments webpage at www.boco.org/BOA. There will be an opportunity to remotely provide public comment on the subject dockets during the respective virtual public hearings portions of each agenda, of each item on the agenda. I'll provide instructions about that when we get to each docket on the agenda. So now I'm going to take the roll call of the Board of Adjustments members. I'm Board of Adjustment member Robert Ukile, and I'm obviously present. Bill Walters. Bill, if you could unmute yourself and let us know you're present.
Good afternoon. Hi, Bill Walters, new to the board.
Thank you. Scott Rudge.
Scott Rudge, present.
George Gerstle.
Gerstle, present.
Thank you. And we have a member of the Planning Commission filling in today for one of the absent board members, Connor Kennedy.
Yes, this is Connor Candidate, present.
Thank you. So just a few reminders for the board members. Please identify yourself before speaking and speak slowly and clearly. All votes will be by roll call votes. Please be sure to have your video on when possible during the hearing, but please remain on mute until you are ready to speak. When you begin speaking, please identify yourself as BOA board member X. It may help to keep your participant list open in Zoom so that you can see who is speaking. The person who is speaking will be bolded. Okay, turning to the agenda, we have 3 items scheduled for today's Board of Adjustment meeting. At this time, I'll take this opportunity to explain the public hearing process. There'll be an opportunity to remotely provide public comment on the agenda items during the virtual public hearing portion of each item. The order of presentation first will be to hear from staff, then the applicant, and then we'll accept public comments from any individuals who wish to speak. Some people may have signed up in advance and we will call on them first. If you did not sign up for public comment, you may sign up in the chat. Please direct all your questions and comments to the board. The chair will direct any questions that arise during the hearing to the appropriate party. Once we are satisfied that we've heard all relevant testimony, the public hearing will close. The board will then discuss the merits of the case and come to a decision. Any member of the public will have a chance to speak, even if you didn't sign up from the BOA webpage beforehand. Once those who signed up in advance have spoken, I will call on any additional members for the public to speak. If you join by computer, please sign up by submitting your first name, last name, address, and the docket number in the chat box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. As each person who is joined by computer and signed up to speak is unmuted, Zoom will adjust your participant status so that you can speak and be seen via video. Once you're finished speaking, Zoom will place you back in the room as an attendant. If you dialed into the meeting via phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9, and we will unmute you when we call on you to provide comments. When it's your turn, the system will request that you unmute yourself by pressing *6. Once you are unmuted by a computer or phone, if you called in, please state your name and address for the record before providing comment. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. A timer will beep at the end of your speaking time. Time can be pooled at 3 minutes per person for a maximum of 10 minutes. You will need to provide the name and address of the other people besides for yourself who are in attendance and donating their time to you. Anyone who is pooling time will need to attend the virtual hearing so that we can verify their presence as we would at an in-person meeting. Please do not submit comments or questions in the chat box during the meeting. The chat box should be used for public hearing speaker sign up only. Please remain on mute when possible. The moderator will mute you if we see that your connection is the source of background noise. Members of the public will be unable to share their screens during public comment. Applicants, please have your presentations pulled up and ready to go. I will announce when we are ready for your presentation, and at that time, you can share your screen. I will now open the public hearing for the first item on our agenda. This is public hearing for docket BAR-21-0006. We will now hear from staff. With the staff member, please present the staff report.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Sam Walker. I'm Community Planning and Permitting staff, and I was the reviewing planner for docket BAR-21-0006, the Schreck barn setback variance. So I just shared my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. If I can get a confirmation. Yes, okay, great. So Derek Schreck and Rebecca Powell are the property owners. Derek Schreck is representing the application on behalf of himself and his wife. The zoning of the property in question is estate residential. It's about 1.4 acres in size. It was previously a little bit under an acre. And then we approved a lot merger administratively under an exemption plat application about a month and a half ago, which I'll go into more detail about in just a second. It is a platted lot of the Fairview Estate subdivision. There's an existing residence and a few small agricultural outbuildings on the property. And the request that we reviewed was for a 54-foot reduction in the required 110-foot supplemental setback, which is measured from the center line of Baseline Road. The intention of that setback reduction is to allow for the construction of a 984 square foot agricultural barn within the supplemental setback. So this lot is located kind of directly east of Boulder along Baseline Road, just on the south side and west of Lafayette. Here is a little bit more of a specific map, so we can see, because it's shaded yellow, it is part of that Fairview Estate subdivision, again on the south side of Baseline Road. This is an aerial photo of the property from 2020, if I remember correctly. So we can see the existing residence as well as the driveway that accesses Baseline Road, which is just cut off outside of the frame, which is to the north of this photo. We see some of those small agricultural buildings distributed throughout the property. What we don't see is the concrete pad that was mentioned in the staff report. So it was built, the concrete pad where they're intending to build the agricultural barn was not constructed at the time that this aerial photo was taken, but it's roughly in this area that I'm circling with my mouse cursor, if anyone can see that, in the northwestern area of the property. This is a comprehensive plan map showing that we haven't really identified anything of note on the property other than this circle with a number in it, which is a view protection score. So we've associated or assigned a view protection score of 1.48 to Baseline Road in the area of this property. We don't really have any concerns related to visual impact with the variance proposal. Just wanted to note that. This is a contour map showing the change in elevation on the property. So it's mostly flat. It does slope slightly upward to the south. So baseline is lower and then it slopes upward as we move further south into the back of the property. No geologic hazards have been identified on the property. This map just illustrates that. It is located within the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan area, which is a shared comprehensive plan between Boulder County and the city of Boulder. We do have some public lands nearby that are owned by OSMP, as well as a few county-held conservation easements, although none are directly adjacent. And then this is the zoning map, which shows the supplemental setback along Baseline Road, which again is 110 feet measured from the roadway center. So just to briefly go into the exemption plat that I mentioned earlier, when this application was originally turned in, the lot description for the parcel was for lot 22 and then the eastern half of lot 23. So we can see the plat map on the right here. So lot 22 is where the residence is located. And then the eastern half of lot 23 was also included in the legal description of the parcel. And then it turned out lot 23 had actually been divided illegally sometime back in the 70s, if I remember correctly. And so we formalized that division through the exemption plat so that the barn could actually be constructed on the eastern half of lot 23. So just to illustrate that a little bit better, this map shows the original parcel boundary, which is this red outline, and then this gray line shows the actual boundaries of lot 22. And then the proposal under the exemption plat was to expand the parcel boundary to match what was deeded to the current property owner, which was lot 22 in the eastern half of lot 23. So that was again administratively approved by staff prior to this variance, with the intention of being able to construct that barn on this property. This is the site plan that was submitted by the applicant. So in this site plan, north is to the right. So Baseline Road is to the right. Remember, in the aerial photo, it was oriented differently. But the only thing that we're looking at here is this concrete pad, which is illustrated on the site plan. That is the intended location of the proposed agricultural barn. And that's why we're reducing that 110-foot setback, which extends well beyond the area where the barn is proposed to be constructed. So I just did a very brief summary of the applicant's hardship statement and narrative for this project. The narrative was actually pretty lengthy. I hope you had a chance to read it. It was included in the staff packet that you should have received last week. But to summarize the hardship statement, most other homes within the Fairview Estate subdivision are not encumbered by the supplemental setback that's affecting this particular property. However, this home is one of the few that is along Baseline Road, accessed via Baseline Road, and is therefore affected by that supplemental setback. They noted that the proposed barn is a small structure that they could move if the roadway is ever actually expanded. So they feel that there's kind of a justifiable reason to allow them to build in the setback because they wouldn't be permanently encroaching into it. They said that the eastern area of their property, so that portion of lot 23 that was added to their parcel through the exemption plat, can't be built on because that's where the septic system, oh wait, excuse me, got my directions mixed up. They can't build on the eastern side of the property, so on the eastern side of the residence, because that's where the septic system is. Building outside of the setback would limit their pasture area on the property. So again, it's an agricultural barn. They're intending to have some livestock on the property, and it would potentially impact their area of pasture. The kind of along a similar line, allowing them to build where they want to would maximize their usable land and minimize necessary improvements for vehicular access. And then they just noted that there were quite a few other residences and existing developments along Baseline Road where similar setback encroachments exist already. So now we'll take a look at a few site photos. Obviously, these photos were taken quite a long time ago. It has not snowed like this in several months. And what I did is I put the main photos here, and then up in the top left, we have that aerial photo of the property with the yellow and black arrow kind of indicating where I was standing when I took the photo, just to give you a little bit of additional perspective. So in this photo, we're standing on the driveway pretty close to Baseline Road, facing toward the area of Lot 23, which was added to the property through that exemption plat. So the residence is just cut off to the left. You can see a few things under tarps over here. That's the location of that concrete pad where the barn is to be constructed. And then this fence line roughly approximates the area or the boundary of Lot 23. In this photo, we've just moved a little bit further up to that fence line, and now we're looking at most of Lot 23. So we see a small ag structure right here. I believe this is on the applicant's property, and then the blue barn behind it is on the southern adjacent property. We have a fence line right here that kind of divides Lot 23, and the proposed barn location is just off to the right behind the location of this photo. In this photo, we're standing on Lot 23 by that chain link fence facing north toward Baseline Road. So now we see the concrete pad where the barn is proposed to be constructed. They're already using it kind of for storage of some equipment. They just want to be able to cover it. And then I turned around and took another photo facing directly south. So we're just, again, looking at some of that pasture area that was mentioned in the applicant's narrative. And finally, just turning a little bit to the east. So we're now looking kind of into the backyard of the residence. We can see they've got it divided off, I guess, for agricultural purposes. In terms of referral responses, we received mostly responses of no concerns from our referral agencies, including the Boulder County Parks and Open Space Department. However, they noted that there appeared to be other viable locations on the property for a barn to be constructed that wouldn't require the proposed variance. And then they also noted that there were some Russian olive trees on the property, which are considered a noxious weed at the state level, and they strongly recommended that those trees be removed. Our access and engineering team noted that legal access to the property was demonstrated because it's adjacent to the Baseline right-of-way. They noted that there are no current plans for Baseline Road to be widened, but that if it was, the barn would need to be moved. They also required that no new accesses be allowed if the variance is approved, and noted that an access permit would be granted at the time of permitting for the barn if the variance in the subsequent site plan review waiver application were approved by staff or by the Board of Adjustment. We received no comments from quite a few of our referral agencies, and then received responses with no conflict or concerns expressed by our Boulder County Building Safety and Inspection Services, as well as the Mountain View Fire Protection District. So now we'll take a look at the criteria review that was conducted by staff. So the first criteria for a variance requires that there be exceptional or extraordinary physical circumstances on the subject property. Staff found that that criteria was not met. The property configuration and elevation and slope are pretty standard for subdivision lots in the Eastern Plains area of the county. We didn't really find that there was any exceptional circumstances in that aspect. The second criteria requires that those physical circumstances, whatever they are, would create an exceptional undue hardship on the property owner if the code was strictly applied. We found that this criteria was not met, again, because we didn't find that the physical circumstances of the parcel in question created that undue or exceptional hardship on the property owners. The third criteria requires that the hardship is not self-imposed. We again found that that criteria was not met because the barn could conceivably be constructed outside of the setback without requiring the proposed variance. The fourth criteria requires that the variance, if granted, won't adversely affect the uses of adjacent properties. We found that this criteria was met. There's no indication that if the variance was granted, that it would negatively impact the use of neighboring properties. Criteria number 5 requires that the variance, if granted, won't change the character of the zoning district where the property is located and would be in keeping with the intent of the code and the Boulder County Comprehensive Plan. Staff found that this criteria was met, as noted by the applicants in their narrative. There's quite a few encroachments already existing along Baseline Road into this supplemental setback. So it wouldn't really affect the character of the zoning district because these encroachments are somewhat common. I'll note there that that's because most of the development along Baseline Road predates the adoption of these supplemental setbacks by the county. So those encroachments exist. They're not necessarily something we've approved. I believe this is the final criteria, which requires that the variance, if granted, won't adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of citizens of Boulder County, will be in accordance with the comprehensive plan and any other applicable intergovernmental agreement that affects land use or development. Staff found that there's no indication that this would have a negative impact on Boulder County citizens. However, we did find that it was not in accordance with the comprehensive plan, which seeks to prioritize travel corridors because approval of the variance would kind of negatively impact the travel corridor along Baseline Road that we've identified and the future scalability of that corridor. And so we found ultimately that the criteria was not met. So because the application did not, because we found that the application did not meet all of the criteria to approve a variance, the staff recommendation is that the Board of Adjustment deny docket variance 210006, the Schreck barn setback. And I'm available for any questions.
Thanks for your presentation. So now I'll open it up to questions. But I do want to remind the board members that this time is just about questions, and that we should hold off articulating our positions until we've heard all the evidence and get to the part where we can talk about our thoughts. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi there, this is Commissioner Candidate. I had a question. And Sam, thank you for that presentation and all the information as well as providing that in advance. I had a question just to clarify if you have the information available on the timing of when the concrete pad was initially installed or poured. My understanding from looking through the documents is that when it was poured, that was within the setback regulations, and then those setback regulations have changed. Roughly, what's the time difference? How long has that pad been there for?
So it's probably a better question for Mr. Schreck when exactly the pad was constructed. It was pretty recent, but the key is that concrete pads don't have to meet setbacks. They're not considered a structure, at least not this one, because it's not, I think the limitation is it has to be smaller or lower than 36 inches above existing grade. If it meets that height limitation, then it doesn't have to meet setbacks. If it was taller than that, it would have to meet setbacks because we would consider it a structure. But so the concrete pad is relatively recently poured. The supplemental setbacks, I believe, were adopted sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. I can't remember the exact timing off the top of my head. They have been in effect for quite a while, but again, the concrete pad is not something that we would require to meet setbacks. It's the structure that they're proposing to build on top of it.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. And so in theory, a neighbor on the same baseline access to this subdivision could construct a similar pad to the one that's currently in use today, given that it doesn't have to meet the setbacks.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
Do any of the other board members have questions?
George Gerstle. I have a question of staff. Is there precedent for approving something similar to what is proposed, and then the requirement or conditioned on it being removed should it have to be at some point in the future? Is that a common practice?
Not that I'm aware of. I think typically as staff, recommend denial for applications like this, but the other caveat that I have to add is that all of our reviews are site specific. So I don't think we typically rely very much on precedent unless it's like an adjacent property or something, which I couldn't find any really nearby properties, certainly not in the subdivision that this lot is located in, that had previously applied for and been granted variances for this kind of request.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do any of the other board members have questions? Hearing none. Next, we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for your time, and Sam, thank you so much for summarizing the application so well, and I really appreciate your thoroughness. If anyone is having an issue hearing me, please let me know. I apologize. I'm unfortunately traveling for work and I'm waiting on another meeting, so they kind of stuck me in a corner. Anyway, that being said, because Sam did a really nice job of kind of summarizing my position on this, I just want to spend my time addressing a couple of specific points. The first one is that the entire spirit of the zoning that we have is to promote the responsible use and stewardship of the land that we have. And with regards to my property, I believe that the hardship comes in the form of that the usable space is a narrow strip that was added on sometime in the 70s, thus preventing any other logical place to put a barn that would have existing access from our current driveway. The reason that it was kind of cited where it was that it maximized the amount of usable land without having to change access points or infrastructure that already existed. The tarpaulin that was pointed out in the presentation by staff is actually part of my neighbor's property. It is not part of mine. And the overhead view from 2020 that shows numerous buildings, et cetera, is also not current. By the time my wife and I purchased the property about 1.5 years ago, most of those structures, with the exception of the truly agricultural structures, the bird enclosures, the duck pond, and the loafing shed, those still remain. Everything else had been removed because they were temporary structures. The concrete pad was partially in place by the time we purchased the building. And the reason that it was poured, to my understanding, is that if you were to look at the overhead, again, you would see a structure on the eastern side of the building. That was actually a tiny home. The previous owner was a large animal vet and was intending to put her veterinary office on that pad when completed, and then subsequently underwent a divorce and moved to Fort Collins. So we completed the pad since it was halfway done, and we were told by our contractor that it fell within the setbacks because it is 8 feet within the stated 35-foot setback that the remainder of Fairview Estates is mandated by. The 110-foot setback, the supplemental setback, was, like I said, and like staff said, is something that's not enforced on the majority of people with my zoning. It is only specific for people living along baseline. And I would note that with a 35-foot setback, that provides for an additional 70 feet of expansion of baseline, which is, in my opinion, and of course it's not as informed as members of the boards, but would provide for any sort of safety concerns for traffic and corridor. I could imagine a 220-foot margin for baseline would be a reinvention of the street and would abut the wall of the Lafayette wastewater treatment plant 1/4 mile up the road. And again, I in no way wish to claim any sort of expertise on this, and I'm sure that the board and the city as well have their reasons for wanting that. And in the spirit of not wishing to disrupt that, since my barn is a kit with no planned utilities, specifically for agricultural storage, I'd be happy to submit myself as a condition for approval in writing that should the county ever feel that the widening of baseline should necessitate the removal of the barn, I would be happy to do so. But realistically, trying to place the barn within the supplemental setback would put it right in the middle of the only usable land we have and would really render it kind of useless for the purpose in which the property was zoned. We would have to still have access for vehicles, for hay and for materials, and we would be driving through the only usable land we have. So there would be no point in doing it were it not to be tucked away behind the trees, kind of invisible from the road, with access to our current driveway. And it would also necessitate the removal of our current infrastructure that has been in place for years, which would include the loafing shed for animals, the duck enclosure, and the grasslands that was planted by a local botanist for ducks and for bees, which, you know, I'd rather not disturb the land that's there and just continue to put a roof over the land that has already been disturbed. And that's why we're seeking the variance only on the supplemental setback. And with that, I will submit myself for questions.
Thank you. Do any of the board members have questions for the applicant? Member Rudge?
Thank you. Scott Rudge, board member. Derek, if you're willing to move the barn, why don't you just put it where you would move it to?
To be honest, sir, the reason that I would be willing to move the barn is because any widening of baseline that would necessitate its removal would drive baseline road almost up to my front door. And so I would be taking the barn to another property I would be selling.
I'm still having trouble making sense of that as a commitment on your part. I guess what you're saying is you're willing to remove it, not move.
Correct. Well, the proposed structure is an assemblable kit, so it is something that's removable, and I would anticipate moving it as well, just because it would be easier. But yes, I would remove it should that ever be a problem. Yes.
Yeah, and that's to me, that's the difference between moving it. To me, implies that you would move it elsewhere on the property, where removing it is simply taking it off the property.
Understood. Yes.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah, I think that was my only question. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Do any of the other board members have questions?
Yes, this is Bill Walters, board member. I have one question. Would it be possible to reduce the size of the barn and still build on part of the pad and have use the pad that's in existence for outside storage?
If I'm understanding you correctly, sir, you're suggesting putting enclosed storage elsewhere on the property and using the existing pad for outdoor storage?
Does the entire pad, is the entire pad that's poured now in the setback?
Yes, sir,
Or
it is.
is just a portion of the pad?
No, unfortunately, the entire pad is within the setback, as is part of the home, to be honest.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members?
Scott Rudge, board member. I'd just like to follow up on Mr. Candidate's question.
Yes, sir.
Do you know when the pad was poured?
When it was started, I don't know. It would have been before we took possession of the property, which was December of 2020. And then we completed it and in February of 2021, since it was already halfway done.
I see. So it was not in its current footprint at the time you bought the property.
No, it was the northernmost edge, the baseline road edge had been set, and the width had been set, but they hadn't completed it. And so what I did was I consulted with an ill-informed contractor, and then I looked up on the Boulder County's website what would be permissible for an agricultural property in my residential zoning that wouldn't require a site plan review. And from the size of my home, since it's considerably smaller than most properties in Fairview, any property, any barn structure under 1,000 feet would meet that criteria. And so I completed the pad to facilitate a barn of under 1,000 square feet.
I see. And I have one other question. It's something that I've been confused about since reading the docket. You talk about a narrow strip. And that narrow strip precluding placement of the barn somewhere else. That narrow strip you're talking about is the distance between your home and the western edge of the property. Is that right?
That is correct. There is existing fencing and there is existing driveway, which I would prefer to not have to modify or and utilize. So keeping those in place would leave a strip of land that would be, roughly 60 feet wide, going back to the back of the property. The southernmost edge of the property has an easement on it, so it makes it difficult to place a barn back there. And then there is a required setback, obviously, from the property line on the eastern edge, thus constricting where you could conceivably place the barn, in my opinion.
So the barn is 41 feet wide, and
Correct.
the distance from your home to the property line is 60 feet, including the half of lot 23.
I would have to double check, but I think that's correct, sir. Yes, the front edge of the pad of the barn would be 43 feet from the edge of baseline road.
If you moved it back from baseline road, adjacent to your home is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
yes.
It would have to come all the way back adjacent to your home to be out of the setback, right?
Correct. And because we have that detached garage, and we'd have to remove the chicken enclosure and the grassland that was planted and the loafing shed, and the barn would essentially bisect that field. So we'd still have to find a way to get, a feed truck in there. And at that point in time, you would have taken, an acre of open space and cut it in half and walking animals back and forth. For me, it would just be, it wouldn't be the easiest way to manage the land properly. And I would not opt to do that.
I see. Okay, I don't have any other questions, Chair Kylie.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Any other questions for the applicant from the board members? Hearing none, we'll go on to thanks for answering those questions. And we'll
Thank
go
you.
on to hearing from any members of the public.
This is Andrew Goldstein, CP&P staff. We currently have no one signed up to speak. For any members of the public, if you're interested in speaking, please put your name and address in the chat. Or if you've called in, you can press *9 to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Chair Kylie, if you want to give them about a minute or so to do that if they're interested.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Andrew Goldstein, CPMP staff. I'm still not seeing any signups to speak.
Okay, thank you. So since there was no public comments, it doesn't seem like there's a need for rebuttal from the applicant. So I'm now gonna close the public hearing. Thanks everybody for sharing their information. And I will open it up to discussion among the board members. I will remind the board members that our decision is supposed to be based on the criteria that staff listed, and that the requirement to grant a variance is that every criteria gets met. In other words, if just one criteria is not met, then we are supposed to not grant the variance. So with that, do any of the board members want to share their thoughts?
Board member Scott Rudge. Just a point of order, Chairman Ukaili. Doesn't staff get a opportunity to rebut or comment any statements made by the applicant?
Thank you. I did skip over that. Sorry, so I will, if there are no objections, I will temporarily reopen the public hearing to ask staff if they have any rebuttal or clarifying statements.
Thank you, board members. This is Sam Walker, CPMP planner. I believe Mr. Schreck also gets the opportunity after I do to rebut anything that I say now or said earlier. I didn't have anything that I particularly felt that I needed to rebut. The one thing that I did do, excuse me, while Mr. Schreck was presenting was I pulled up our mapping software just to try to roughly illustrate the required setback, the required supplemental setback from baseline road. So I'm going to share my screen again and we can just take a quick look at that. I'll note that this is going to be a very rough measurement based on the mapping software and the aerial photos that we have. So this is, I think, based on this photo, which is from 2020, I think the photo that I had in the staff presentation earlier was probably from 2018. So this one's a little bit more recent. But what I did here is I just drew a line from the center line of baseline road, 110 feet south into the property, just to give everyone kind of a rough idea of the kind of setback we're looking at. I think Mr. Rudge was asking some questions in this direction as well, that maybe this could help illustrate a little bit better. So this is the approximately the distance that any structure would have to be out of from the center line of baseline road. So as Mr. Schreck said, it looks like some of the residence is within that setback. And then the concrete pad again is roughly in this area, if you can see my cursor moving. And so in order for the proposed barn to meet setbacks, it would have to be about in this area where the white vehicle is located in the aerial photo. So roughly adjacent to the concrete parking pad that's in front of their garage. So I just wanted to pull that up to maybe illustrate a little bit better what Mr. Schreck is trying to avoid. But I don't have anything that I felt needed clarification or rebuttal on my part. So if you have any further questions for me, I'm available for them. Otherwise, I think we should probably give Mr. Schreck a chance to have the final word.
And Mr. Walker, Scott Rudge, board member, I just have one related question. If it's possible, or even approximately, where would the setback from the north or the west be?
I'd have to look up the setbacks for the estate residential zoning district. Off the top of my head, I want to say, is it 8 feet, 7 feet, something like that? So it wouldn't be very far. I will also note that the black parcel boundaries that are shown on this aerial photo are not necessarily accurate to where they would be located relative to the aerial photo. They're usually offset by a couple feet. So I'm gonna guess that this tree line is where the actual property line is. And so it would probably be roughly on the western edge of this structure right here is where that setback would be.
Thank you. One other question, and if you can't answer this, Mr. Walker, I'll ask you to keep sharing your screen and maybe Mr. Schreck can comment on it. Where exactly is the septic? On the east side?
That I don't know. You'd have to ask Mr. Schreck.
If you can see, well, is it possible to see my cursor at all?
I think you're just going to have to direct me.
On the septic fields are on the east side where the temporary structure, that is correct. That is the septic field. That was the tiny home that was intended to be moved to the pad that was poured that no longer exists. And just to address any concerns about the rear of the property, the dot in the middle of the backyard is our well, which is we are off mains water, so building there is not an option in my view. And then the white vehicles at that particular vehicle and the one at the rear of the property are no longer there. Those were removed at the time of purchase, and the western setback, if I remember correctly, from my particular plot is 10 feet. The setback, yeah. I'm sorry. The pad as it currently sits, I believe, is 21 feet from the western edge.
So I would just note, this is Larry Hoyt, the special counsel to the board. The appropriate setback for that district is 7 feet from the side yard and 15 feet from the rear yard line.
Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Mr. Schreck, do you have any rebuttal on any of the comments made by staff?
I do not. One additional thing that I would, I guess, point out would be for the rear of the property. I believe, and Sam, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's, in addition to the 15 foot, I think there's also an easement back there as well, because we're on the ditch. But that being said, it's another reason why I didn't consider moving, in addition to having to drive a vehicle through our free land, why I did not consider putting the barn in the rear. But other than that, I have no additional comments.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry for not offering you that rebuttal opportunity first time around. Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing and open it up for board discussion.
Yeah, this is George Gerstle. I'm sympathetic to the challenge of Mr. Schreck, but I see nothing that causes me to question the recommendation of staff in turning this down.
Thank you. I'm of a similar mind, but I don't want to foreclose any discussion. So does anybody else, any of the other board members want to discuss, or do you think we should move to a motion?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Candidate. I think that this proposal does meet with the nature of the land and the zoning, but also I don't think that it meets all of the hardship criteria outlined. And so I'm in agreement with Mr. Gerstle.
I'll go next. Scott Rudge, board member. Technically, I agree with the other three board members who have stated position. I'd be inclined nevertheless to grant a variance. I think we're going to rule just the opposite in the next case on the docket. I think, although we're not authorized to consider environmental impact, I think the environmental impact of requiring this barn to be built in another location is a concern. It should be a concern of this board. And although I'll bring it up again because Larry quite loves to hear me talk about this. We wrote a letter to the is it the Boulder County Board? It's not the Planning Commission. Asking for the authorization to consider environmental impact. That letter has never been answered over 2 or 3 years now. I don't think that we should deny a variance that causes someone to either not build a barn and leave stuff in a tarp on a concrete slab close to the road where it can be unsightly. And I don't think we should make them, well, I'm not as sympathetic about the slab. It's clearly been installed after the 110-foot setback was put in place. Nevertheless, I don't personally see a better place for the structure on the property. And I don't see that it will impact future expansion of baseline, as it's a temporary structure, or more temporary than other structures that are also in that setback, including Mr. Schreck's house and other houses along that roadway. So I understand the legality of denying this variance request, but I don't understand the logic of it, and I'm going to vote to approve it with the condition in writing that the structure be removed should baseline widening be put in place, or a plan for baseline widening. But I'm happy to be outvoted too. I've been outvoted on this board many times.
Thanks, Mr. Gerstle.
Yeah, I have a question for either staff or Larry Hoyt. I'm sympathetic to Board Member Rudge's statements, and if I could, I would vote to overrule the recommendation of staff, but I would guess I would ask for advice from legal counsel on whether we have that flexibility.
As Member Rudge did note, that this board did request of the Board of County Commissioners their consideration of an amendment to the land use code that would incorporate a special exception authority to the Board of Adjustment for specifically environmental impacts, taking those into consideration to permit a special exception to be granted when a variance would not qualify under the criteria for variances. The Board of County Commissioners has not acted thus far. I understand that there is some process in place that will look at that, but it hasn't taken place yet.
Thank you. Larry, are we allowed to hear from Dale at this point now that the hearing's closed? That doesn't seem prudent. Not that I don't always want to hear from Dale.
Yeah, I mean, because anyone who's viewing this might have had something, might have something to say about whatever was interjected now, but they may have given up since the public hearing has been closed. I would say that it's better not to reopen for any other purpose.
Okay, thank you. So sorry about that, but we're gonna stick to the discussion among the board members. So, Connor?
Great, thanks. Yeah, this is Connor Canaday speaking. I just wanted to inquire from those of you on the board currently if there's any historic precedents on some type of in writing agreement of taking down or moving structures, you know, in what we're talking about as a possible way to meet here in the middle. Is that a legally binding statement? Is that something that has ever been used before in applications or approving of variances and things like that?
So this is board member Ukaili. We can include conditions, but I do want to express my opinion that I think especially these days in the current climate, that it's important for decision makers to play by the rules, that we should not trump the law that we agreed when we took this position to implement, to override that with our personal preferences. That I realize that you know, our decisions, one could say, are relatively small, although I think they're very meaningful for the applicants. But I still, from a kind of good governance point of view, it's very disconcerting for me to hear members say they understand what they're legally required to do, and yet they're gonna act otherwise. That I just don't think that's the way that this board or our country in general should act. I will also say that if we were gonna delve into our personal preferences on the policy front, this is a small piece of land, and in having livestock on small pieces of land tends to be very environmentally detrimental, as well as detrimental to neighbors, right? Like livestock create solid waste, and there are appropriate stocking rates for livestock, and a less than 2 acre parcel doesn't even have a full animal as the appropriate stocking rate. So I guess I would disagree. I think that the appropriate environmental decision would be to not create exceptions to allow activities that are not sustainable. But again, I think all that's irrelevant. We have our criteria. I think staff very appropriately laid out why the criteria aren't met, and therefore I think it's our obligation to deny the variance.
This board member Rudge, I'm not going to respond to any personal comments about my position, but I have to say that it's not pleasant. I think the purpose of the board is to determine whether the staff is appropriately evaluate the criteria. I don't think the purpose of the board is to go outside of the law. I do think it's the purpose of the board to act as a citizen oversight panel for staff to evaluate whether they have correctly interpreted the criteria. And I do think that environmental impact is an appropriate criteria. It pains me that the county commissioners have not acted on our letter for 3 years to formally include that. But to go back to answer Mr. Canadade's question, the board has approved variances to setbacks in order to limit the having to move structures, historical or otherwise, that are located within setbacks. In the past, there is precedence for that. What I don't know of precedence for is a condition to a variance that requires the removal of a structure that was allowed under the variance. I think the variance, all the variance does is moves the borders of the setbacks. It doesn't allow the structure itself. It's the building permit and site plan review and other things that address this structure. So I don't think, Mr. Candidate, that there is a precedent for a condition on a variance that a structure be, once approved, be moved.
This is board member Bill Walter. So while I'm very sympathetic to the owner here and I think what he's trying to do is good, and I applaud that. However, I think the criteria has been set, and I don't really see any way around that. I guess one other comment would be is that maybe the board can send another note or letter to the county asking them, could they offer more guidance to us on the environmental issue that we talked about, and then encourage the homeowner to resubmit should we get further guidance on that. I'm not sure I got cut off there or not, but
No,
those were my.
I think we all heard you. Thanks for your thoughts. So I would like to move for a motion unless anybody else has more discussion. Board member Walters, would you like to offer a motion? Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, this is Bill Walters, board member. I would like to offer a motion that the board accept the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
George Gerstle seconds the motion.
Thank you. I'll now do a roll call vote. Bill Walters,
Aye. Yes.
board member Rudge,
Board member Rudge, I'm going to vote against that. And a point of order, Mr. Ucali, if you'd like to consider this or not. Normally, we state the variance number or the docket number, and then the position that the board has taken, either to deny the variance or to accept the variance with or without conditions, rather than a statement that we accept the staff's recommendation. That's just giving you that from historical perspective, and I think that's what Larry Hoyt has advised in the past as well.
okay, thank you. I do feel that it was fairly clear that board members Walters' motion is to deny the variance based on the reasons articulated by by the staff recommendation. So I think that was clear, and so I'm going to go ahead and continue with the voting. But I will be more precise going forward. Thank you, Board Member Walsh. Sorry, Board Member Gerstle.
Aye.
Board Member Kennedy.
Aye.
And this is Board Member Ukaili. I also vote in favor of the motion. So the motion passes and the variance is denied for the reasons articulated in the staff recommendation. Okay, we will now move on to our second item on the agenda. And I will repeat the information about public participation. So we're now going to take up our second item on the agenda, which is variance 22-0001. Any member of the public will have a chance to speak, even if you didn't sign up from the Board of Adjustments webpage beforehand. Once those who have signed up in advance have spoken, I will call on any additional members of the public to speak. If you join by computer, please sign up by submitting your first name, last name, address, and the docket number, which is 22-0001. In the chat box. As each person who is joined by computer and signed up to speak is unmuted, Zoom will adjust your participation status so that you can speak and be seen by a video. Once you're finished speaking, Zoom will place you back into the room as an attendee. If you dialed into the meeting via phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9, and we will unmute you when we call on you to provide comment. When it's your turn, the system will request that you unmute yourself with *6. Once you're muted, either via computer or phone, if you called in, please state your name and address for the record before providing comment. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. A timer will be at the end of your speaking time. As I explained before, you can pool your time up to 10 minutes, but the person that you're pooling your time with needs to provide their name and address, and the person must be present. Please do not submit comments or questions in the chat box during the meeting. The chat box should be used for public hearing sign up only. Please remember to mute when possible. The moderator will mute you if we see that your connection is the source of background noise. Members of the public will be unable to share their screens during public comment. Applicants, please have your presentation pulled up and ready to go. I will announce when we're ready for you to present, and that time you can share your screen. So this is the public hearing for docket variance 22-0001. We will now hear from staff. Would you please present the staff report?
Hello again, board members. This is Sam Walker, the Community Planning and Permitting Department. I was again the reviewing planner for this docket, which is variance 22-0001, the Gerwing variance at 1065 Cherry Rail Road. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And once I get an indication that everyone can see that, we'll get started. Good, okay. So for this project, Mark Gerwing is the applicant on behalf of Stacy Tellinghusen and Kevin Walsh, who are the property owners. The property is zoned rural residential and is just under 9/10 of an acre in size. It is a legal building lot as identified or determined as by the county under docket or subdivision exemption 980020. There's an existing residence and several small outbuildings on the property. And the request that we are looking at today is to reduce the required supplemental setback along Cherryvale Road from the required 90 feet to 53 feet in order to allow the construction of several additions to the existing residence and detached garage on the parcel. So first, we're going to take a look at a vicinity map. In this case, we're right on the edge, the eastern edge of the city of Boulder, on the western side of Cherryvale Road, just north of its intersection with Baseline, which we can also see illustrated on the location map seen here. So again, anything that's grayed out on this map is located within the municipal boundary of the city of Boulder. Anything that's white or yellow is unincorporated county property. And again, we're on the west side of Cherryvale Road, just north of where it intersects with Baseline. This aerial photo of the property is unfortunately not particularly clear. We'll see a more detailed one a few slides later, but this is the property in question we're looking at. You can see a few small outbuildings distributed throughout the property. And then we also have the main residence and detached garage in question just on the eastern property edge. Our comprehensive plan map identifies quite a bit in the area of the property, but nothing on the property really, except for a small area of wetlands that's associated with South Boulder Creek that extend on the west area of the property. Those don't really impact the review that we're conducting today, but just wanted to note. There's really no elevation change on the property. It's pretty much flat. It does slope very slightly downward to the west because South Boulder Creek is down there, so the land slopes in that direction, but it's not particularly perceptible. No geohazards have been identified on the parcel either, which is what's illustrated by this map. And then this map shows the floodplain on the property. So the 100-year and 500-year floodplain incorporate most of the western half of the subject parcel. Again, their proposed developments that we're looking at today will stay out of those areas, but I did want to note those as kind of a limiting factor on development on the parcel. Again, this property is located within the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, which is a shared plan between the county and the city of Boulder. And then we have the zoning map indicating that the property is zoned rural residential and that there is also the supplemental 90-foot required setback that's measured from the center line of Cherryvale Road. So I was a little bit more prepared for this presentation. This picture illustrates the approximate distance of that setback of 90 feet from the center line of Cherryvale Road. So you can see that indicated with this red line right here. And then another solid red line drawn at the approximate distance of that setback across the entire parcel. What this is really meant to illustrate is that the entirety of that existing residence as well as the detached garage are within that 90-foot supplemental setback. There's no portion of either structure that is outside of that supplemental required setback. So this is the site plan that was submitted by the applicant. What I did here is added a red line showing the, they did indicate it on the plans. The red line is just intended to make it a little bit more clear where that supplemental setback is in relation to the existing and proposed development on the property. So on the left, we have a site plan of what currently exists on the property. So again, we can see that the residence as well as the detached garage are completely within that supplemental setback. On the right, we have the proposed site plan, which shows the existing residence and detached garage, as well as the additions. And those additions are partially located within the supplemental setback, and some of them are entirely within it. And that's a little bit better illustrated on this slide, which just overlays those proposed additions with yellow blocks to make it a little bit more obvious what exactly we're looking at as part of this variance request. So we have 3 main structure additions, 2 to the western side. So keep in mind, west is up in these site plans. 1 small entryway addition to the eastern side of the residence, and then 1 small addition to the western side of the detached garage. Again, just a better view of that exact same site plan with the yellow highlighting indicating the proposed additions. And then this is the hardship statement that was submitted by the applicants. It's pretty straightforward. They're essentially just noting that the entirety of the structures are within that supplemental setback, which precludes them from constructing any additions to them. I also wanted to note that there was a previous variance that was approved by the department or by the Board of Adjustment in 2003. So this is kind of a summary of that request and the conditions of approval. So the request for variance 03-03-0005 was for a reduction of plus or minus 4 feet of that supplemental setback to allow the construction of a roughly 1,000 square foot addition on the western side of the existing residence. So staff did recommend approval of that variance with some conditions, and it was approved by the Board of Adjustment on April 2nd of 2003 with the staff recommended conditions, and those conditions are listed in italics here. One thing I'll also note, however, is that although the variance was approved and then subsequently the applicants for that variance were granted an extension of the time frame in which they had to act on it in May of 2004, it doesn't appear that they ever actually did. There were no building permits pulled. There were no additions constructed to the western side of the residence. So the approval of that variance lapsed, and now we've come back for this new request by the current property owners. And this map is from that original or that previous variance request from 2003. So we see the proposed location of the addition to the residence. We see the existing residence outlined in red right here, and then another rough estimation of the 90-foot required supplemental setback. Now we'll take a look at a few site photos. Again, I've put the main photo off to the right and then an aerial photo of the property with an arrow indicating the rough location and orientation from where the picture was taken on the left. So in this photo, we're actually standing across Cherryvale Road facing toward the detached garage, which you can see clearly here. And then the residence is behind the tree and fence off to the left. So this is just to kind of illustrate how close they are to the existing roadway. This photo, we're standing on the property in the driveway entrance facing directly south. So we see their fence line, we see Cherryvale Road on the left, and then again, the residence and detached garage to the right. This photo is taken from the Cherryvale Road right-of-way, looking over their fence toward the residence. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to walk the property. It was a bit of a last-minute site visit. So all the photos are taken from over the fence, but I think this is relatively clear. This is the area where they're proposing their entryway addition. I'll note now, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, that staff are recommending against approval of that specific addition. And then the proposed western facade additions will go further back on the other side of the residence from where this photo was taken. This photo, we're standing on the northern property line facing kind of southwest into the property. So this wall is the northern face of the detached garage. The proposed garage addition will go off the back right here, roughly in the area. You can see kind of a ski lift chair or something right there, and that's where that other addition is proposed to go. In terms of referral responses, we got written responses back from the Building Safety and Inspection Services team, who noted they didn't have any concerns with the proposal, but that they had some requirements if the variance was approved for the construction of the proposed additions. They need permits, they have certain wind and snow loads, and will need to meet build smart requirements, things like that. It's a relatively standard response from our building team. And then our access and engineering team noted that legal access was demonstrated because the property is adjacent to the Cherryvale right-of-way. They noted that there are no current plans for Cherryvale Road to be widened. If the variance is granted, an access permit is required and will be issued at the permitting stage for the additions, but noted overall that they had no conflicts with the proposal for the variance. We did receive one public comment in support of the application in response to the 165 notifications that were sent to nearby property owners. And then again, we received no comments from a pretty long list of our referral agencies and got responses of no conflicts, from our Parks and Open Space Department, the floodplain team, the Mile High Flood District, the Fire Protection District, our own historic team, as well as Excel Energy. So now we'll take a look at all of the variance criteria. So criteria 1 requires the existence of exceptional or extraordinary physical circumstances. So in this case, the property is not particularly steep or narrow or anything like that. However, the existing development on the property was mostly constructed prior to the adoption of the supplemental setback, and it's located entirely within that setback. So staff found that this criterion was met because there is no way that they can build an addition to the residence or detached garage without encroaching on the supplemental setback, which was again adopted, in this case, I think nearly 60 years after the residence was moved onto the property. Criteria 2 requires that the physical circumstances create an exceptional or undue hardship on the property owner through the strict application of the code. Staff again found that this criteria was met because there's no way that they can make additions to the residence without encroaching on the setback, and building outside of that setback would increase the overall site disturbance without really benefiting the applicants. The third criteria requires that the hardship is not self-imposed. Again, the construction of the residence and detached garage predate the adoption of the supplemental setbacks from the center line of Cherryville Road. So we found that that criterion is met because it was not a hardship that the applicants created. Criteria 4, or the fourth criteria, requires that the variance, if granted, won't adversely affect the uses of adjacent property as permitted under the code. We've found that this criterion was met as well. We don't anticipate any negative impacts if the variance is approved. The fifth criteria requires that the variance, if granted, won't change the character of the zoning district where it's located and will keep with the intent of the code and with the Boulder County Comprehensive Plan. Staff noted that similar encroachments into the setback are common in this area of Cherryville Road, and that ultimately, if the variance is approved, the type of development that's proposed by the applicants and will be looked at under the subsequent site plan review waiver application will most likely be in character with the existing development in the area. However, we noted that the proposed construction of a entryway addition on the eastern facade of the residence would actually increase the encroachment into the setback rather than just kind of acknowledging it, minimizing the setback's impact, and then building additions on just the western face. And so for that reason, one of our recommended conditions of approval is that we reduce the setback. I can't remember the exact distance. I think it was 9 or maybe 15 feet to allow the construction of all of the western facade additions to the detached garage and the main residence, but we disallow the entryway addition on the eastern face of the residence so that we're not increasing the encroachment into the setback. We're just reducing it enough to allow some additions that will extend off the back and outside of that setback. The final criteria requires that the variance, if granted, doesn't adversely affect the health, safety, welfare of Boulder County citizens, be in accordance with the comprehensive plan and any intergovernmental agreements affecting land use or development. And so in this case, we found that the majority of the proposed variance would meet that criteria. However, again, we're not recommending that the entryway addition on the eastern side of the residence be allowed to be constructed because that would increase the encroachment into that required setback, potentially affecting the safety of the Cherryville travel corridor. And so as conditioned, we felt that this criteria could be met as well. So with all those in mind, the staff recommendation is that the Board of Adjustment conditionally approve docket variance 220001, the Gerwing variance, subject to the conditions that were outlined in the staff recommendation. And I have the full text of those conditions on the following slide if any of the board members would like to take a look. Other than that, I'm available for questions.
Thanks. Can you show us the next slide, please?
Of course.
Thanks. Thanks for your presentation. I will say, if you don't mind going forward, if you could number the slides in the slide deck, it might be more efficient when we try and ask questions.
Sure.
Thanks. Great. So I'd like to open it up to questions from the board members. I can't see folks while the screen is up, so if you have questions, if you want to just go ahead. Okay, if no one else has questions, I have a couple of questions. Can you go back to the slide on the previous variance granted by the Board of Adjustments?
Sure.
So when the Board of it, I'm looking at the first bullet pointed condition. And so I'm reading that to say that the Board of Adjustments in 2003 said that they weren't going to grant any other variances to intrude into the setback. Am I understanding that correct?
Yes, you are. I think the key is that that was a condition of this approval, but that approval then lapsed when the applicants never acted on it. And so it's effectively just gone away completely, and we're now just reviewing this as a completely new application. I just wanted to note this as kind of we have a bit of precedent on this property for granting the variance that the applicants are applying for, but that this one in particular has expired previously, and so we're not really looking at this this condition in the same way.
So it's your understanding that if the board grants a variance, but it's not acted upon, the variance gets vacated, like it no longer exists?
Correct. And then, so that means that any future applicants, it expires after, I think, a year after the board's approval is issued. And so if the property changes hands, like I believe has happened in this case, in the intervening years, any future applicants would come back, would have to come back and make their own request, which is exactly what we're looking at today. The implication being that the land use code may change over time. And so we don't want to approve a variance and then have it sitting out for 20 years or something like that, and then be acted on 20 years later when the goals of the land use code or the restrictions may not be the same. And so maybe we wouldn't have granted it 20 years later. In this case, we really are, because the code hasn't changed that much in at least in this aspect.
Okay, let me ask a hypothetical question so I can understand better. If the property owner at that time had constructed based on this variance, then would you all be taking the position that we shouldn't grant this second variance because the first variance said this is it?
So I think if the previous owners had acted on the previous variance approval, we wouldn't recommend an additional reduction of the setback. So we would still hypothetically allow someone to construct additions on the property. We would just require that all of those conditions be constructed outside of the required supplemental setback. So if the previous variance allowed for a reduction of roughly 4 feet as approved by the Board of Adjustment. So if a new property owner came in and asked for that to be further reduced by 10 feet for a total of 14 feet, we probably would recommend that the Board of Adjustment deny that application because we had this existing condition of approval that was acted on.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. And can you show us one of the slides that shows the setback line and then the expansion in yellow?
Sure. Excuse me, I think this is probably the best illustration.
Thanks. So, so I don't understand if the yellow is past the red line, why do they need a variance for those two yellow rectangles that are past the red line?
So I think the rectangles are maybe not actually accurate on this one. If you look at the site plan that's underlying it, you'll see that it says proposed right here, and that's indicated with this line. So the additions are actually being built from here where my cursor is to the west in both cases. You can see that over here as well. The proposed actually goes below it.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, I apologize. That's my fault that it's not very clearly indicated there.
So can you show me with the cursor kind of where the back wall of the residence currently is?
It's going to be this line right here. You can see that it's indicated with the existing line that's broken with this little hash mark. So this is where the back wall of the existing residence is currently located. So it's pretty well within that supplemental setback.
Right. Okay. And then in terms of the first criteria, where it says there exists exceptional or extraordinary physical circumstances of the subject property, you're in saying that that criteria is met, you're interpreting that the physical circumstances of the subject property is actually the house, not any characteristic of the land. Am I understanding that?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty decent explanation. So the physical circumstances that the entirety of the house is located within a setback that didn't exist at the time the house was constructed. And so the physical characteristic of the property is the required setback that's been imposed on it, but the setback was imposed after the house was constructed.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any other questions.
I have a few follow-up. Scott Rudge, board member. Just for clarification, Mr. Walker, even if the two yellow boxes at the top of this plan were completely on the, I believe it's the west side of the red line, and the two yellow boxes on the east side of the red line didn't exist, this house would require a variance to be approved because it's non-conforming, because the house is in the setback already. And so to make any additions to it, whether on the sides or on top or wherever, would require a variance. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So it doesn't matter whether those yellow boxes at the top are inside or outside the red line.
Well, I mean, I guess I just should maybe reiterate the answer is that a variance is required to construct any additions to the residence or the garage because both of them are entirely located within the supplemental setback.
Or even if they were partially in the supplemental setback, they would still be non-conforming and so require a variance. Isn't that right?
The portions of the structure that are within that, if they had, let's say the structure extended outside of the supplemental setback partially, any area of the structure that was within the supplemental setback would be considered non-conforming, and then anything outside of the setback would not be.
Thanks for that clarification. And then once this variance is approved, the entire structure will be considered to be conforming, and any additional construction on the west side of it would be permitted. I mean, would have to go through a building permit or so forth, but would not need a variance.
So I wouldn't say that's correct. One of the conditions of approval that's recommended by staff is that the approval is limited to the additions that are proposed as part of this application and the subsequent site plan review waiver application that the applicants have filed but is on hold pending this variance. So we wouldn't, I guess they would have to come back through for another variance request unless we applied a condition like I believe we have that similarly limits this one to the previous variance approval, where we say we're not going to grant any additional variances because now you'll have structures that are, or portions of the structure located outside of the setback that an addition could be built on without a variance.
So this variance approval doesn't make this structure conforming?
No, it would only make the additions conforming because
Okay.
we would have reduced the setback for them and they would be located outside of the required setback.
Okay. And does the code, do the requirements A and B preclude the possibility of making other detached structures on the property as a
No.
remedy?
No, as long as they met setbacks, they would still be able to build other detached structures as long as they went through the appropriate planning process and building permit process.
Right. Okay, thanks.
So I had this is board member Kylie, I had a follow-up. What's the purpose, if you know, of the expansion of the garage, the detached garage?
I'm not entirely sure. I would say we don't typically, that's not something we're looking at in this case. We're just looking at the reduction in the setback, and then the purpose of the garage expansion is something we would look at through the site plan review waiver process or site plan review process.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any further questions. Does any of the other board members have further questions? Hearing none, thanks for your presentation, for your answers, and we'll now hear from the applicant.
Thank you.
Are you ready for me?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is Mark Gerwing. I'm an architect acting as the agent for Stacy Tellenhausen and Kevin Walsh. Thank you, board members, for your time, and thanks staff for the work they've put into this. As staff pointed out, the entire existing house and the entire existing garage are fully within the Cherryvale setback, and so no additions are possible to this house without some kind of variance. It's a very small house, 951 square feet approximately. And we'd like to be able to at least think about being able to do an addition to it. You can see what we would proposed is 2 additions to the west side of the house, 1 small addition to the front entryway, and then an addition to the garage also on the west side. The reason for the addition of the garage is because the interior dimension of the garage is less than 17.5 feet. So it's very challenging to get a vehicle, certainly can't get a truck in there and park it and walk around either end of that vehicle. So we'd like to at least extend it enough so that it can be used as a functional garage. With regard to the house, understand staff's concern about the eastern addition, which is the small enclosed entryway. And about how that would increase the setback or increase the in the direction of the setback. I would like to at least request that we be given the ability to kind of discuss that a little bit or talk through that a little bit. There is a historic covered but exterior entryway at that location. I have a historical photo I could share with you if you'd like. Even if we can't get that as an enclosed entryway, we would at least like to consider to have the ability to build that covered entryway. It's quite small, but we'd like to be able to consider that. Staff has recommended that we consider the setback at 75 feet. That puts it about 2/3 of the way through the house. So normally if the setback was say at the front of the house, the little exterior projecting covering that we're talking about potentially doing in the front would be excluded from setbacks because it would be an allowable encroachment like a roof eave. So I might request that we modify staff's recommendation so that we could at least include that historic piece of the house and so we could rebuild that. I'd also request, there are some portions of the existing structure that are in very poor condition. We would like to be able to rebuild some of them. We'd like to be able to do some construction that is still within the staff's recommended 75 feet. That would not be adding any square footage. It is just simply re-roof framing some of those areas. In my experience, that if that area is still within the setbacks, then we often run into problems during building permit review. So I would request that we consider moving the staff's recommendation to allow us to at least rebuild some portions of that existing roof. Other than that, I think my clients, Stacy and Kevin, would like to be able to speak to the board, and I'd like to be able to provide them some time to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, Chairman Ukaili and members of the board. Thanks to Sam and Mark both for the great summary of our proposal. I don't know that I have much to add to that other than just to say, you know, I think my husband Kevin and I love this property. We have really enjoyed being in the house. We love the yard. We have a large garden, and we love our neighbors who have their horses grazing in part of our pasture. And so our goal is really to maintain the character of the house, and then, you know, we like the character of the neighborhood as well, and to propose this, you know, what I think is a fairly modest addition. About a year ago, we had a daughter, and with an extra family member, we have found that we need more living space. We've been sort of overwhelmed with strollers and diaper bags and all of the things that kids come with. And so that's, you know, the reason for our proposal. I think the other piece that Mark alluded to is that the house itself is really old, and we are hoping to have the opportunity to kind of fix up some of the existing property, particularly make it a little bit more energy efficient. It's particularly cold and hard to heat in the wintertime. And so that's our hope here. So appreciate your consideration of our request.
Thank you. If you all are done, then I'll open it up to questions from the board members.
Hi, this is Connor Candidate speaking. I just wanted to request Mr. Gerwing, if you could share the photo of the historic entryway that you had mentioned. I may have missed it, or I would be interested to at least see that, and feel free to take your time before sharing that.
I'm happy to do that. Do I have the ability to share my screen?
You should.
Can you all see that?
Yes, thanks.
Yes, we can.
So what we proposed was basically this same structure that you see here. This is from the 1957 tax appraiser's photograph, which is, I'll say again, as I've said every time I do one of these projects, an incredible and amazing resource we can tap into. This is a covered but exterior covering over the front door. The front door is in the same location it is now. The existing house and what we're proposing keeps all of this in exactly the same form it is now. We were proposing to build this and enclose it. We would love the opportunity if we don't want to add towards floor area that is towards the encroachment, then we could at least build this covering over the front door.
Great, thank you for pulling that up.
Sure.
If I can ask a follow-up question, is it your understanding that building that cover that we're looking at right now would require a variance from us?
It is. As it is a structural element that would be built into it doesn't have floor area, but it is still a structural element built into the setback that is over 30 inches above the ground.
Okay, and what if you put like an awning, is it your understanding that that also would require a variance?
It's my understanding that any structures built above 30 inches above the ground, I might not have that right, might not be 30 inches, but built above the ground level that are in a setback would be an encroachment with a few exceptions in the code, like roof eaves. The setback in this case, this entire house is within the setback. So this construction, it's my understanding, would be an encroachment, a further encroachment on the setback.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from board members? Hearing none, why don't we now go to public comments?
This is Andrew Goldstein, CPNP staff. We currently have no one signed up to speak. If you're interested in speaking on this docket, please put your name and address in the chat. Or if you've called in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Chair Ukaila, if you want to give a minute or so for people to do that if they're interested.
Great, thanks.
This is Andrew Goldstein, CPNP staff. I'm still not seeing any speakers signing up.
Okay, thank you. So then now we'll move on to allowing staff to make any rebuttal or clarifying statements.
Thank you, board members, and thank you to the applicants for attending. And I always appreciate the historic photos too. I did want to have, or want to maybe make a couple of clarifying points. So Mr. Gerwing, when he was talking about the proposed setback reductions and the staff recommendation, I just want to point out that condition 2 limits the 75-foot setback, or the reduction of the required setback, by 15 feet. It limits it only to the additions that are proposed as part of this application and the subsequent site plan review waiver application. So it's not a blanket reduction to 75 feet across the entirety of the parcel. It's only really 75 feet to allow for the addition to the western facade of the detached garage. And then we would also be doing, I think it's a roughly 9-foot reduction in the setback for the additions to the residence on the western side. So that's the way it's currently conditioned as recommended by staff. So I just wanted to clarify that that's how the approval would go if the staff recommended conditions were accepted by the board. The other thing that I wanted to point out was just to maybe clarify a little bit on the comments about the eave that we're still looking at extending into the eastern setback. So typically eaves and roof lines are allowed to extend 2 feet into any given setback, and that's allowed by the land use code. However, in this case, it wouldn't be allowed because it would be increasing the degree of the nonconformity of the structure, which is disallowed by the land use code. So extending the eave off of the front of the residence would require the same setback reduction that has already been requested for the enclosure of that area. I'm not sure that whether or not we could tailor a condition to allow the construction of an overhang, but not an enclosed floor area, because it's not really something that we're reviewing. We're just reviewing the request to reduce the setback. And so the position of staff is that any increase of the degree of nonconformity is not in characteristics with the land use code, and therefore that would not meet the criteria for approval of the variance. I'm available for questions. It looks like Mr. Hoyt may have something to say about that as well.
Yes, thank you. Larry Hoyt, Special Counsel to the board. I did email to the members of the board prior to this hearing a copy of section 4.10.02 of the land use code, which deals with non-conforming structures. And it says, as Sam has pointed out, that it does not allow anything that would increase the degree of nonconformity. And it has some other provisions, which I think now that we're talking about a bit of a revised provision related to the eastern addition or the eave over the front porch. It says that if the non-conforming structure was damaged or destroyed by causes outside the control of the property owner, it could be restored to its original location and floor area and height, as long as that complies with the current provisions of the code, of the building code. But that must happen within 6 months of the date of that non-conforming structure having been damaged or destroyed. It should also be noted that with respect to the roof, the problems with the roof, that there is an exception for related to hazardous health or safety situations that would allow a building permit to be given for rectifying a non-conforming structure to bring them up to no longer have those hazardous health or safety situations apply.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hoyt. That was something I meant to point out as well, is that the code does allow for repairs and health and safety improvements to make sure the structure is sound and safe to live in. Even when it's non-conforming, it just doesn't allow for the degree of non-conformity to increase, which is typically like a full remodel or further extension into a setback or something like that.
Yes.
Thanks. So I'll open it up to questions on that staff rebuttal. And I'll go first. So is like a cloth awning, is that considered construction? Or would that be allowable?
I would say we would consider it to be construction because it would most likely require permitting of some kind because it would be extending into the setback and would be above 36 inches in height. It's probably a little bit of a gray area, but I think at the end of the day, we would consider it a covered porch because it's permanent, and then that would still be increasing the degree of the nonconformity by extending into the setback.
Thank you. And any other questions on staff's rebuttal? Hearing none, I'd like to offer the applicant the opportunity to offer any rebuttal.
Well, I guess I would like the opportunity just to clarify what we are requesting and make sure that there's no confusion. Is it possible, Sam, for you to go back to your diagram with the showing the red setback line?
Sure, just give me 1 second. Is this the one you were looking for, or did you want the detailed plan?
How about the does the detail one allow you to turn off the yellow highlighting?
I could probably do it quickly. How's that?
Great. So this is the current back of, you guys can't see my cursor. I just realized that. So gosh, there's no way to, yeah, so that's the current back of the house. So we are requesting that obviously we'd be able to build back from that house. And you can see that some portion, the first 7 feet or so, are within the setback. The setback edge is the red line. But Sam, if you can come down the page from that existing back of house to that notch in the house right there, we're rebuilding the roof over that portion from the notch to the back of the house. We're planning on rebuilding the roof there because the existing structure is failing and it is, there's essentially no roof insulation. So we're keeping the front gable of the house in both directions so that the house looks substantially the same from the front, but we are requesting that we be able to rebuild the house in that area I've just described. The 75-foot setback recommendation from staff places that 75-foot line approximately halfway through that kitchen plan that you can see there now. Yeah, and so I would love it if we could so we could rebuild that roof up to that dashed line that is going down the page, because that's the roof portion that is failing for us.
This is Scott Rudge, board member. So now I'm confused, Mr. Gerwing, is that in your application, that request?
It is.
Okay. And has staff recommended against approving that?
I think it's difficult to understand exactly what we're doing when we're looking at a two-dimensional diagram, because we are increasing the floor area in the area that I've shown as proposed. We are only changing the roof area in the area I just recently described. So a plan does not very easily describe what we're doing. We submitted elevations that it's a little bit more clear.
This board member Rudge still. What you actually do with the building, I think, is part of the building permit process. And we're here just to say whether the variance on the setbacks can be approved.
That's my understanding. I just wanted to be very clear that we're not just talking about the additions. We're also talking about rebuilding some portion of the existing roof.
This is board member Ukaile. Just to follow up on that point, though, staff and our council just told you, though, that you're allowed to fix a roof in a non-conforming situation. So does that address the concern?
I think it does. I can say that I've been submitting building permits and planning applications in Boulder for 22 years. And when we submit to the building department, it shows work that, if it shows work that will be beyond what is a 75-foot setback variance, then we often get stopped at that point, and our process comes kind of to a screeching halt. So it's the last, that last little bit of square footage. I just wanted to make sure.
So since I'm merely special counsel to the board, and perhaps Erica, as part of the county attorney's office, could talk about what we've just been discussing about the roof.
Hi, this is Eric Rogers, Assistant County Attorney. I'm not sure I'm following all of the details about the roof and what staff is recommending approval and what they're not. It may be helpful if we have staff comment too. I'm happy to look up any provisions in the code, but I think I'm not following what was actually in the proposal and what wasn't.
This is Sam Walker, CP&P staff. So I think it's important to clarify that, like we had discussed with the nonconformity regulations or nonconforming structure regulations, the approval of the variance doesn't prevent the applicants from replacing the entire roof of the house if it's required for the health and safety of the residents in that house. The only question is if it would increase the degree of nonconformity, and that's typically with roof replacements either going to be increasing the height of the residence above what currently exists or adding floor area. So if there's no addition of floor area caused by that roof replacement and the roof height isn't changing, it's just being replaced, that's not something that needs to be approved by a variance. That's something that you could just get a building permit for.
We are proposing a roof height change over the existing old roof area.
I don't think that was considered by staff.
And this is
I'm
Eric
happy to share
Rogers.
the elevations that I submitted if you'd like.
Oh, this is Eric Rogers, Assistant County Attorney. I just want to offer if there is something that staff hasn't considered, and I would defer to Larry Hoyt to give the board legal advice, but the option would be tabling this so that staff could have a chance to look into it.
I guess I'll kind of put that to the applicants. Would you prefer to table our consideration, or do you want us to just go forward?
Well, not to make things more difficult, but obviously that's something I should talk to my clients about since it's not my house. Part of the problem with the existing roof over that back portion is it is extraordinarily low, and I do not believe that we can get code compliant insulation and that space to work with the existing structure that is there now. I think we'll be removing that roof in that back corner section and rebuilding a new roof in that back corner section, and that new roof will certainly be higher than the existing one.
Yeah, so I do believe that that requires a variance, and because staff has not considered that as part of this particular application, it makes it difficult for the board to act on that.
It was my understanding that we were submitting for a variance for all the things that we submitted our drawings for. You know what I mean? Yeah, maybe I could have made that more clear in the three-dimensional diagram.
Oh, this is board member Bill Walters. Can you give us a scope of the height change there? I mean, you're talking about 6 inches or 6 feet?
You know, I think to meet the code and to meet the intention of the design, we'd be talking more. I think that portion of the roof would be as high as the existing gable at the front of the house, if not maybe slightly higher.
Mr. Gerwin, I could ask my fellow members for us to take like a 5-minute recess, and you could talk to your clients and let us know whether you want to table it. But it seems like we cannot right now approve the variance that you want, or well, we can't even decide on the variance with regard to raising the roof, so to speak.
That would be great if you could just give us a couple minutes so we could talk with my client real quick.
Do any of the board members have it's 6:04? Do any of the board members have opposition to a recess until 6:10?
Are you moving to put us in recess until 6:10, Chairman Ucali?
Well, I first wanted to see if you opposed before I did the motion.
Is it an option to move to the next agenda item and then come back to this?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
So do you mind just take?
That's fine with me.
Okay, how about I move for a 5-minute recess. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Scott Rudge seconds.
Okay, so unfortunately I have to do roll call. Bill Walters,
Aye.
Scott Rudge,
Scott Rudge, aye.
George Gerstle,
Aye.
Connor Kennedy,
Aye.
Robert Ucali votes aye. So we'll be in recess until 6:10. Thank you. this is board member Kylie. If the other board members can turn their cameras back on so I know you're there, that'd be great.
This is board member Bill Walters. It won't let me turn the video on because the host has stopped it.
Andrew, can you, okay.
That's the same for me, so. Okay,
Okay.
Great. So we're reconvening on variance 22-0001. And Sam?
Thank you, board members. This is Sam Walker, CPNP planner. So while the board was in recess, I had a discussion with some other members of staff, and I think it was just my oversight that the elevations for the proposed additions weren't included in the referral packet. So I don't think those were actually sent to the board members, but the proposed height increase of the roof is 2 feet from 12 to 14 feet. I think the discussion that we had, we can summarize by saying that that increase is not increasing the degree of nonconformity. So it's not prohibited because the structure is nonconforming. Because increasing the degree of nonconformity would be if there was a height limit and they were already exceeding that height limit and asking to increase beyond that. But in this case, the height of the additions, I don't think is an issue at the staff level. I think the board could approve the recommended conditions, could approve the proposed variance with the conditions recommended by staff, and that would not preclude the replacement of the roof with an additional 2 feet in height of that roof above existing grade.
Thanks. So, Mr. Gerwing, is that satisfactory?
That sounds great, and I appreciate you guys being willing to take a look at that again. You know, I guess my only request would be, is there something in the language that we can put that either that 75 feet or it includes the reconstruction of roofs, and that are just some way that, so, I mean, you know, this is step one. We've got a lot in front of us. When we go into planning department, that they understand that in fact we are not building within the setback in an area we're not supposed to be.
Sam Walker, CPNP staff, maybe I could. So the way the conditions are currently written as recommended approves the additions as proposed in this application and in the site plan review waiver, which does show that 14-foot height. So I think that the conditions as currently written do allow for that height increase in writing. And then that's something that I'm also assigned to your site plan review waiver application. Assuming that this variance is granted, that's something that I would write in as a clarifying factor with the waiver staff determination.
Great, thank you, Sam. That sounds like that makes it we'll be fine with it as we move forward. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. So then the applicant does want to continue to proceed with the board's consideration of this variance request.
We would, you know, we if there's any way we could get that historical covering over the front door, we'd love that. We understand we shouldn't do additional square footage there, but rebuilding the existing kind of historic porch portion would be nice. I just don't know if there's any way that the language can be written to do that.
Okay, does the applicant have anything else?
Not from us, thank you.
Thanks.
This is board member Roger. I do have a question for Mr. Walker on staff then. If we're saying that the height of the roof, existing roof, covers the height of the rebuilt roof, then why doesn't the fact that there was a structure over the front door not cover the enclosing of that structure? Why I appreciate why Mr. Gerwing brought this up, because he said let's have apples and apples. So why isn't the front structure then covered as not further encroaching into the setback, since it was already there, as evidenced by the photo?
So the photo was from, I think Mr. Gerwing said it was from 1957, and that would be increasing the degree of the nonconformity. The roof replacement is allowable because it's for the health and safety of the residents of the structure. So that's necessary for the structure to be sound for someone to live in it, as opposed to the addition of what's effectively a new entryway. I mean, it did previously exist, but it doesn't exist currently. And that's not really a health and safety issue, at least as determined by staff. So they're not really apples to apples, because they're two different concepts that we're addressing as part of the land use code's restrictions on non-conforming structures.
I have to be honest, I didn't hear you ask him anything about the health and safety of the new roof proposed. I'll grant you that it probably is safer than the what looks like a single wide that was parked onto the back of a house and then kind of bolted on. I agree that a new roof would be more safe than that, but I'm just looking for consistency here.
So I think in the hardship statement, or at least in the narrative for the site plan review waiver, the applicant stated the roof was failing in certain spaces. They also stated that in the hearing. So I mean, I think generally the approach of the department is that a roof replacement is not something people do just for fun. It's something that they do when they have to. And so that's why we're saying that it's not increasing the degree of the nonconformity, because it is explicitly, per the applicants, something that's being done to make the structure safe and viable to live in.
So if they told you that the addition of an enclosed entrance would prevent rain and snow from coming into what's admittedly a small and their only main living space, would that be considered under the code or not?
I don't know that it would be. I think that's a bit of a difficult hypothetical to answer, because if they were trying to make that argument, we would probably ask for some evidence for it. But I think the response at the staff level would also maybe be that they could create an enclosed area inside of the existing structure walls that would accomplish the same purpose without increasing the degree of the nonconformity.
Right. Thanks.
I'd like to give the applicants an opportunity to offer any rebuttal just on that last exchange.
I don't think we need to comment so much on that. I understand Sam's point, which is that covering actually does project forward out of the house, but it's not floor area, and it was a historic part of the house, and so it's obviously in keeping with the character of what was originally constructed there. We're happy to give up the floor area. It's just it'd be nice to be able to recreate the existing or the historic property.
Thank you. Do any of the board members have any questions on the applicant's rebuttal? All right, hearing none, I will now close the public hearing portion, and we will move to discussion among the board members. Board member first. You're on.
George Crystal, board member. I'm in support of the staff recommendation with, but would remove, but I would allow the construction of the historic overhang on the front porch, not only for its historic value, but to provide a safe place out of the rain and ice and snow to move in and out of the house. So I would, that's my feeling on where we are and what I think would make sense.
Board Member Rudge, I'm also in favor of granting the variance. With removing the condition of not allowing the replacement of the historical extension into the setback over the front door.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that about the eastern side?
Are you asking me to repeat?
Yes, please.
Well, I'm not making a motion right now. This is Board Member Rudge again. I'm voicing support for Mr. Gerstel's proposal that we approve the variance with the conditions of the staff, accepting the one condition that prevents the applicant from building the safety feature on the front of the house that keeps snow and rain away from the front door. I'll state it more clearly when everybody's had a chance to express their opinion.
Thank you.
I believe this is Connor Kennedy speaking. I believe I'm in agreement with the previous board members in moving forward with approving the recommendation, but also including the Eastern variance.
This is Board Member Bill Walters. I concur with the discussion here.
Thank you. And this is Board Member Robert Ukaili. I'm gonna vote against it because I disagree with the staff's interpretation of the first criteria. I think that the first criteria applies to the physical characteristics of the property, not the building. And that's been my interpretation, I hope consistently while I've been on the board. But with that, I will see if anybody wants to make a motion.
This is George Gerstel. I'll try to make a motion. I move that the board approve the variance as recommended by staff, with the exception of allowing a construction of a historic overhang over the front door for safety reasons.
Can I ask a clarifying question? When you say historic overhang, are you just acknowledging that it historically existed? Or are you saying that the condition is they have to rebuild it to the historic structure?
To rebuild it to the historic structure.
And sorry, just to clarify again, we looked at the photo and the historic structure was not enclosed. So
that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I will ask for a second.
This
I'll
is
second that.
okay. That was Bill Walters.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And do we want to have discussion on the motion before we vote?
Well, this is Board Member Rudge. I'm furiously, panning through the staff packet to see if there's a way we can clarify condition one. I don't see 90 feet and 75 feet marked in the drawings. I think for clarity, it would be nice to be able to recommend the approval of docket VAR 22-0001, subject to the staff's conditions, with the exception of condition 1, where the setback is reduced from 90 feet to whatever the number is, maybe 70 feet or 72 feet, in order to reconstruct the historical safety feature over the entrance to the house. I'd like to get to that kind of wording, but I don't think I've got the data to do that. Is that
Member
something?
Rudge,
Yes,
Member
please.
Rudge, I believe that if you look on page, let me look at it. If you look at section E of the staff report, the variance, if granted, will not change character of the district, etc. In the third paragraph, it says that the applicants propose to reduce the required setback to 53 feet in order to allow for the construction of an entryway addition on the side of the residence.
I see that. Thank you. Mr. Hoyt, Board of Adjustment Attorney. So this is Board Member Rudge again. I'd like to restate the motion put forward by Board Member Gerstle that we approve docket VAR 22-001, subject to the staff's conditions, however, amending condition number 1 to reduce from 90 feet to 53 feet measured from the center line of Cherryvale Road, such that the additions to the western facades and the residence and the garage can be constructed in addition to the proposed historical overhang on the eastern facade. That's my motion.
I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? Otherwise, I'm going to propose that we vote both on the motion and the friendly amendment. Hearing none. On the motion on docket variance 22-0001 with the friendly amendment. Board Member Walters, how do you?
Aye.
Board Member Rudge,
Scott Rudge, aye.
Board Member Gerstle,
George Gerstle, aye.
Board Member Kennedy,
Connor Candidate, aye.
and Board Member Ukaili votes against. So the variance passes with the conditions. Thanks, everybody, for participating and working through all that, and we will move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you all.
Sorry, Vice Chair, I just wanted to check in. I do have a prior commitment I have to get to. Will you have a quorum without my participation for the next agenda item?
We do have a quorum. We are supposed to offer the applicant, because we'll have less than the full slate, we are supposed to offer the applicants the opportunity to table it. And we're supposed to freely grant that if they want it.
Right. The positive action of the Board of Adjustment requires the vote of 4 members. So that would require a unanimous approval for the next docket if, and so it's up to the applicant whether they want to proceed or not.
But you, we appreciate you filling in. And, you know, if you have to go, you have to go.
You can go ahead and ask the applicant first if you'd like.
Okay, that would be great. So on variance 22-0002, can the applicant be promoted to participant for a moment so we can address this procedural issue? Thank you. So I'm assuming you heard that conversation if there were only 4 members, would you want to still proceed?
So, so how long would the reschedule be if we did reschedule? Like, what would that look like in terms of time from now?
I'll ask someone from staff to try and answer that.
This is Andrew Goldstein, CPNP staff. The next Board of Adjustment hearing is scheduled for August 3rd.
You know, I've been listening, and you guys seem very reasonable. And I don't think our request is outlandish in terms of variance. So I'd be willing to proceed with the 4, recognizing that we'd need a unanimous vote to move forward. Pushing it till August, as far as the timeline of our project goes, we'd like to maybe even be breaking ground before then, if we could, assuming the variance passes and we get the building permit. Just because where we are up in the mountains here near Ward, we have a sort of a limited time frame where we can build weather-wise and some of those things. So we've been kind of at this for a little bit, but yeah, I'd be willing just to go with the 4 of you. It's not ideal, but I think I'm confident that I don't think you guys are going to see a whole bunch of challenges here with our request. So we're willing to proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So thanks again, Connor, for stepping up today.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're going to start the public hearing part for docket variance 22-0002. And I'm going to read again the part about public participation. Any member of the public will have a chance to speak, even if you didn't sign up from the BOA webpage beforehand. Once those who have signed up in advance have spoken, I will call for any additional members of the public to speak. If you join by computer, please sign up by submitting your first name, last name, address, and docket number in the chat box. As each person who is joined by computer or signed up to speak is unmuted, Zoom will adjust your participant status so that you can speak and be seen via video. Once you are finished speaking, Zoom will place you back in the room as an attendee. If you dialed into the meeting via phone, please raise your hand by pressing *9, and we will unmute you when we call on you to provide comment. When it's your turn, the system will request that you unmute yourself with *6. Once you are unmuted, either via computer or phone, if you have called in, please state your name and address for the record before providing comments. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes of time. A timer will beep at the end of the speaking time. You can pool your time up to 10 minutes, but you'll need to provide the name and address of the people whose time you're pooling, and they have to be in attendance. Please do not submit comments or questions in the chat box during the meeting. The chat box should be used for public speaking, for public hearing speaker sign up only. Please remain on mute when possible. The moderator will mute you if we see that your connection is the source of background noise. Members of the public will be unable to share their screens during public comments. Applicants, please have your presentation pulled up and ready to go. I will announce when we're ready for your presentation, and at that time you can share your screen. This is the public hearing for docket variance 22-0002. We will now hear from staff.
Good evening, board members. Pete LaRange, CPNP staff. I will go ahead and share presentation here as soon as it lets me. All right, everyone can see that? Okay. As stated, this is for variance -22-0002 Glacier View Ranch height variance at 8748 Overland Road. The applicant is Rocky Mountain Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, as represented by Brendan Westgate. The zoning of the property is forestry. As stated, location is 8748 Overland Road. Parcel size is 515 acres. As such, it is considered a legal building lot. Existing is a camping and recreation facility approved through SU-74-0004. The proposal is a request to adjust the maximum building height in the forestry zone district from 30 feet to 40 feet for construction of a new ropes course. Here's the vicinity map. You can see it is just north of Overland Road, a little ways east of the Peak to Peak Highway, and a little ways west of Jamestown. Aerial photograph, zoning map, you can see it is forestry. Comprehensive plan, there are a number of layers here, but most notable for the purposes of this review are the significant natural communities, the high biodiversity area, and the peak to peak scenic corridor. Geological hazards map, there are some on the property, but none located at the specific project site. Public lands, you can see there's a number of U.S. Forest Service lands around it, one county open space, and then a number of private conservation easements south of the property. For planning areas, about half of the parcel is located in the Rural Preservation District and is within the Jamestown IGA. Again, however, the proposed location for the specific project is outside of both of those. Here's the site plan provided by the applicant. You can see the old ropes course was located here on the eastern end of the property. The new ropes course is down in the southwestern section, adjacent to the main camp area. This is just a little bit closer view of the site plan. Here are some of the plans submitted specific for the ropes course. Fairly straightforward. This is the tower that is the primary point that would exceed the allowed height. A couple of site pictures. This is the entrance to the camp off of the road. This is once you get in to the specific location where the ropes course is proposed. This is looking north. These cones are roughly where some of the poles would be going. Same looking south towards the ridgeline. So the main camp is kind of back off in this area, and there's a ridge that runs roughly along here. A little bit better view of the access road that comes in that would lead to the ropes course area. Again, the main camp is accessed up over this direction. This is the picnic and camping area east of the ropes course. Again, you can see the ridge line kind of peeking out behind the trees to the east here. These are the poles that they have already acquired as part of this. As far as referrals from the Boulder County Building and Safety Inspection Service team, noted that it will require building permits, and the building permit submittals are to include any applicable accessibility requirements, including parking, signage, and accessible routes. Boulder County Parks and Open Space Natural Resource Planner reviewed it and determined that there would be no impacts to natural resources. However, they recommended that the lower ropes or wires be removed during the off season, so male elk would not get tangled in their line, get tangled with their antlers. Wildfire team does not have any concerns about the height variance, but noted that mitigation requirements will be addressed at the time that the building permit is submitted. Xcel Energy likewise said they had no concerns, but noted that a minimum 10-foot radial clearance must be maintained at all times around all overhead electrical facilities. There are none anywhere near the proposed location of the ropes course. Several referrals came back with no concerns, including our access and engineering team, Boulder County Public Health, the Historic Preservation Team, and Boulder County Child Health. We did not receive any public comments on this, either for or against. And then a number of agencies did not respond at all, including the Greater Allen's Park Alliance, the Fire Protection District, the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water District, Jamestown Planning, Boulder Valley and Longmont Conservation District, or the United States Forest Service. As far as the criteria, exceptional or extraordinary physical circumstances, it was determined during staff review that there are no locations on the property that are both ADA accessible and have sufficient slope without excessive grading. And staff determined that excessive grading would negatively impact the delicate nature of the property. And the Board of Adjustment has previously determined that these do constitute exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. Therefore, staff determined the criterion is met. B, because of these circumstances, the strict application of the code creates an exceptional or undue hardship on the property owner. Again, it has been determined, staff determined that there are extraordinary physical circumstances that prevent it. Therefore, the criterion is met. C, hardship is not self-imposed. Industry safety standards have changed due to increased safety concerns, and these are outside of the applicant's control. The old course was located in the trees, and elements of it have deteriorated over time to the point where they are no longer safe. And because of the industry changes, the original course cannot be reconstructed. Therefore, staff found that the criterion is met. D, the variance if granted will not adversely affect uses of adjacent property owners. This is located well inside the property and is surrounded by tall trees, and the tower would not be visible to neighboring properties. Staff did recommend some conditions to ensure that it blends into the background. Therefore, as conditioned, the criterion can be met. E, the variance if granted will not change the character of the zoning district. A ropes course at an existing camping facility is not in conflict with the forestry zoning district. Similar structures have been permitted in the county at similar properties, including one that was granted a height variance in 2020. That was variance -20-0002, the Girl Scouts camp. The increased height of the structure will not change the character of the zone, but staff does recommend a condition to limit the height to the minimum necessary to achieve the goal, so 40 feet above grade. As of 2020, county staff were drafting a code revision to allow structures such as these in the county, reflecting the position that the recreational structures are not necessarily inappropriate in the forestry zoning district. Therefore, as conditioned, the criterion can be met. And F, the variance if granted does not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Boulder County and is in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Staff does not anticipate any impacts to health, safety, or welfare. And again, the drafting of the code amendment to address structures like these reflects that it does not represent a departure from the comprehensive code. Therefore, the criterion is met. Therefore, staff would recommend that the Board of Adjustment conditionally approve variance -22-0002 Glacier View Ranch height variance with the conditions listed in the staff recommendation. And I'm happy to go on and show those conditions if the board would like.
Yeah, if this is board member Kylie, if you could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, here's the first page. There are 8 of them in total.
Can I just ask, is the open space recommendation about removing the lower ropes in there?
Thought we included it, but we may not have. Yeah, it looks like we did not include it as a recommended condition.
Okay, and I guess I'm kind of jumping the line to ask questions, but can you go back to that slide where we saw open spaces comment?
Yes.
And so your understanding when they say off-season, they mean off-season from the perspective of the camp?
Correct. That would be when the camp is not in use, or when the ropes course is not in use seasonally.
Okay.
Obviously, we would not expect them to remove the lines every time there's no one using the ropes course during the middle of the summer. So this would specifically be during off-season for the camp.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry to use the chair prerogative, but I'll open it up to the other board members for questions for staff.
This is George Gerstle, board member. Just to clarify that this will not be visible from any place else off the property. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Thank you.
So I do have an additional question. Well, first, you use the acronym IGA. What does that stand for?
Intergovernmental agreement.
Okay.
So that's, yeah, the agreement between Boulder County and Jamestown.
And then changing topics, it's your position that the Americans with Disability Act applies to a rope course with a 40-foot ladder that one has to climb up?
Based on the materials submitted by the applicant, the purpose and intent of the ropes course is to be accessible to all. Some of those individuals would need assistance as part of it, but that is the intent, yes.
Okay, and how do people covered by the ADA get up that ladder?
I would defer to the applicant on that. I'm not an expert on ADA as it relates to ropes course towers.
Okay, thanks. And in terms of the location, what about the location makes it ADA compliant versus any other place?
The majority of the parcel is fairly hilly and wooded. This is one of the locations that is, this is really the only location that is this open and flat and has easy vehicular access via the road. Anywhere else that would be looked at would require fairly extensive grading to provide that vehicular access or make it flat enough for those with mobility issues to be able to access the towers.
Okay, that I understand what you're saying. How does the height relate to that? Like, so if they were in the same location, but the tower was 30 feet.
The height is necessary to provide sufficient slope on the zip line for it to function as a zip line without running people into the ground. So a safety issue. The ADA accessibility is to get to the tower in the first place.
Okay, thanks. I don't have any other further questions to other Board members have questions for staff? Hearing none, we next ask the applicant to give their presentation.
Sure. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Brandon Westgate. I began employment here at Glacier View Ranch just in January. So this project application was really already in the works when I got here. I just want to give you kind of a brief history, and I won't take long tonight because I know you guys have had a long afternoon already. Just kind of talking about where we've been, kind of where we are now, where we hope to be with this height variance. I've talked to several of the people who have had a relationship or been employed by Glacier View Ranch for several decades. And I just kind of want to share with you a little bit of kind of the ropes course. Here at Glacier View Ranch, we had an older ropes course, which was plotted on the map that your staff showed. It was built in the trees. That course was built in the 1980s. Back then, that was standard practice to build ropes course in trees. And a few years ago, it was noted that a couple of those trees were looking like they were dying. The course was inspected, and the course ultimately failed the inspection because of those trees that were questionable. So the old ropes course was officially decommissioned in 2018. And it was at that time that the staff who was here then at Glacier View Ranch, they began looking to replace the old course. And in the process of seeking to replace the old High Ropes Challenge course, it was discovered that the industry standard had shifted from courses installed in trees to courses installed on poles. And so I've been told that these courses constructed on poles are much easier in terms of being able to design them, because frankly, you can put a pole wherever you want, but trees sort of grow where they are. So in terms of course design and some of those things, it's easier to plan a course. Also, poles are much more predictable in determining stress loads and things like that. So from an engineering perspective, poles are just superior in some ways to trees. And also because they're poles and they're not living organisms, they're immune from some of the diseases that can progress pretty quickly on an otherwise healthy tree and render a tree that looked healthy in a few years to be not usable for a ropes course. So poles allow for all of these different advantages when compared to trees. And so that's just kind of a few reasons why industry standard has shifted from putting ropes courses from the trees to poles. And so the design of the new proposed course on poles instead of trees allows us to find a better location, frankly, for the course that's going to allow for a better overall experience. And we'll put our course in a situation or a camp that kind of makes sense for what we're trying to accomplish here. The old course in the trees was constructed, was built on trees that are over 50, some of them are over 60 feet high. And those trees really provided years of serviceable high ropes course while it was in operation. Unfortunately, some of those trees, because of damage to the trees from weather and natural events, has rendered that course unusable. So what we're seeking really is a height variance, as you guys know, from the normal 30 feet height restriction. We're seeking an additional 10 feet in height to allow for the fully designed ropes course that our engineer has designed for us, so that we can really utilize and try to kind of recapture the majesty of the old course in a different location. Receiving the variance would allow us to really accomplish what we're trying to accomplish in terms of helping some people with disabilities, ADA, to be able to experience the ropes course where they wouldn't have been able to with the course that was in the trees. There's this kind of a tower, and it's been shown in the picture. There's going to be, it's not really an elevator, but it's a way that we can raise our guests up that have limitations up into that tower. They'll be harnessed in the whole time. These courses have been designed and tested repeatedly. They're really safe. and really provide guests with limited mobility the ability to get up into that tower and then zip line down from that tower to be able to enjoy not only the thrill of being at height, but also to be able to enjoy the thrill of a zip line. And if any of you guys have ever zip lined, you kind of maybe know what that's like. So where the new proposed location for the ropes course will be placed, it's not visible by any of our neighbors. It's really not visible from a lot of the locations in our camp. So it's not going to be any kind of an eyesore. It's not going to hinder any views or anything like that. These high ropes challenge courses have really proven to be an effective vehicle for team building, for groups, for confidence building for individuals. And our old course provided both of those opportunities. And we've sort of been missing that here at our camp. You guys may or may not know that we have a lot of campers that come during our weeks of camp up here at Glacier View Ranch. We've got about 100 10 to 12-year-old campers up here right now. So our proposed course, as kind of the old course was, will be run by trained professionals that have been trained in ropes course management. We run our course by what we call a challenge by choice, which means that each participant is guided by a trained operator. The participant is encouraged to challenge themselves to kind of reach the next point on the course. If you've ever done a high ropes course, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But at every point, there's an option for them to stop where they are and exit the course. There's no shame. There's no humiliation involved. It's simply, I think I'm good with where I'm at. I don't know that I want to go to that next level. So like I said, at Glacier View Ranch, we've kind of missed having this element in our camp. We're looking forward to really having this new high ropes course installed and getting it operational so that we can kind of witness again that individual growth that takes place with the people that do it, because they feel a great sense of accomplishment when they complete the course. Even if they just complete part of the course, it helps them overcome some fear, and it's just kind of an amazing thing. And also the team building places. There's groups that come and go through a challenge course, and it really bonds them together as a team when they go through it together. So just talking with our engineer and ultimately the builder that's going to build it, if the 30 feet simply won't work for our course in terms of getting the slope that we need for the zip line, and really the features that are kind of connected to that central tower. Everything, it just really won't work for us. And I appreciate the fact that you guys have building codes. I fully get it. I'm from Arkansas. I just moved here. I've flipped about 4 different houses. I'm very familiar with codes and restrictions and why they exist. But I would really appreciate you guys considering kind of where we are in our remote location, and all of the things that have kind of been laid out by your staff. So I appreciate the fact too that it's been suggested that some of those lower ropes should be removed when the course is not in use, and we would certainly be happy to comply with that. We've got a lot of wildlife that go through our area. We had a moose come through the camp the other day, so we see an abundance of wildlife, and the last thing we would want to do is to try to prevent wildlife from coming in or have them injured while they're on our property. So we would comply with any of those things that you guys feel necessary or suggest that might be helpful in that range as well. So I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, I'll do my best to try to answer those. Again, I'm not an engineer, but I would be happy to try to help answer some of those questions if you guys have any.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from board members. Thanks. I have a few questions if none of my fellow board members have them. What is the season calendar wise? What's the season of the camp?
So we run our camp sessions, essentially it's June through July. Our schedule may change year to year just based on kind of where weekends fall and some of those things. But that's how we operate our camp. This year we started getting our staff in. So we hire college students and high school seniors who have graduated school. We hire them to be counselors here at our camp. We bring them to camp for a good solid week. It was 9 days this year for training, to kind of teach them what we do at camp, to teach them safety protocols. They're all first aid and CPR certified. We run through a lot of trainings and certificates to make sure we're in compliance with all of the requirements that Denver has, or I should say that Colorado has, in terms of a child care facility, because that's what they deem that we are as a summer camp, as a child care center. So our staff comes in for a week, and then we run 5 weeks of camp here at Glacier View Ranch. So essentially our last day of camp will be that last weekend in July.
So would it give you enough wiggle room if we defined off season as August 15th to May 15th?
Yeah, that should give us plenty of wiggle room. And we're even, not knowing 100% what the design is in terms of the lower ropes portion and what's required down there, we'd be willing, if it's not, something super labor intensive and taxing to remove those ropes at the end of each day during camp even. Because like I said, we don't want to cause any animals harm or anything like that. So.
Thanks.
Sure.
And the that device that provides accessibility to people covered by the ADA for the main tower, is that in what you've already submitted to the planning department?
So the engineer submitted those plans, and I haven't fully vetted those to see. I'm just not sure if it's in there or not. I believe that it is, but I'm not 100% sure of that.
Okay. Would you be comfortable with a condition saying something like the main tower will have a device to provide access to people covered by the ADA?
100%. I'd be at yes, because that's what the engineer has expressed to us.
Great. I don't think I have any other questions. Anybody else? Hearing none, we'll move on to the public comment part.
This is Andrew Goldstein, CPMP staff. We currently have one person signed up to speak, which is Darren Gottfried. Anyone else who would like to sign up to speak, you're welcome to do so in the chat right now, or if you have called in, you can press *9 to raise your hand and we will unmute you.
This is board member Rudge. Mr. Goldstein, can you unmute Mr. Gottfried so he can give his statement? Thank you.
Thank you. And I am here just to offer support to Brandon. I also work for the Rocky Mountain Conference and am here just to help answer questions if there are any. So I very much appreciate your time.
Mr. Gottfried, for the record, I think we need you to give your address, even if it's at the camp. Just please state
where I'm currently located.
Your legal address.
Oh, sure. It is 2605 or 262. I'm sorry, 2320 South Downing Street in Denver, Colorado. Those are where our offices are located.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your comment.
Oh, no problem.
We'll give other folks one more minute to see if there's anybody else that wants to offer comments.
This is Andrew Goldstein, CPMP staff. I have not seen any other people sign up.
Thank you. So we'll move on to if the staff has any rebuttal or clarifying statements.
Pete Larange, CPMP staff, did go back and check, and yes, the plans do include an item listed as ADA lift arm, so that is included in the plans that were submitted. And just as a kind of clarification on why staff did not include the removal of the lower lines as a condition of approval for the height variance is simply that those lower lines did not play into the height variance itself. So that's why we didn't include it, but staff would have no objection to it being included as a condition.
Thank you. Any questions from the board on staff's rebuttal? Thank you. And does the applicant have any rebuttal on comments made by the public or staff?
Nope, I don't. I appreciate you guys' time though.
Thanks. With that, I will close the public hearing and we'll move on to board discussion.
As board member Rudge, I'd like to proceed directly to a motion to approve the variance with the conditions as stated by staff. So this is variance 220002, the Glacier View Ranch height variance. I move that we approve this variance with the 8 conditions assigned by staff.
Thank you. So we're still in discussion, and I did want to discuss that I would like to add a 9th condition about the removal of components that are lower than the height of an elk between August 15th and May 15th, and during the evenings to the extent practicable while the camp is in session. So any other discussion?
Yes, this is board member Rudge. Mr. Ukaili, I don't think that that's an appropriate condition. I don't think that within the law, this board is empowered to impose operating conditions on a variance. What's the penalty if they don't take down these ropes one evening or during the off season? Do they lose their variance? Do they have to take the whole thing down? What's the enforcement mechanism for that condition? I think this is something that's more appropriately put into their operating permit or their building permit, but not in the variance for the use of the area for this purpose. That's my feeling within the law.
Thank you. So I will respond to that. I don't know what operating permits they have to get. And the board doesn't have any control over the building permit, but I do think that it's important that that condition be in legalese runs with the land, that it always exists, even if there's change in ownership. And I do think that we have imposed similar conditions. It's a condition about the structure. In terms of what the penalty would be, I would guess that would make them a non-conforming use. If there are ropes in the off-season, then they would be a non-conforming facility. So I do think that there is an enforcement mechanism. I would also say that, you know, that they and their insurance company would probably insist that they abide by it, because their tort liability would be astronomically higher if there was a variance and they were not complying with the variance and someone got hurt, or you know, the state owns the wildlife, and so it's a trustee of the wildlife, and it could bring some sort of action as the trustee for the wildlife if they injured wildlife while violating the condition of their variance.
Board Member Rudge, respectfully, Mr. Ukaili, I disagree that you have the authority to add an operating condition that runs with the land as a member of the Board of Adjustment. I didn't hear you state any prior precedent for that. I didn't hear you state any land use code that allows you to do that. I heard your preferences, your personal preferences, but within the law, I think we should stick to that.
Yeah, so I understand that you're upset, but the law provides for us to protect wildlife. That's one of the considerations. And this is, you frame it as operating, but it's about the structure. We're just having a time component of what the structure looks like to try and accommodate them. You're totally entitled to your opinion that the board doesn't have an obligation to protect wildlife. I would suggest you reread the code, because it's pretty clear on that point. And
I would suggest maybe Mr. Hoyt might be the appropriate person to weigh in on this.
I do not believe that the code prevents a condition that such as that suggested by Mr. Ukaili, so the vice chair. So it's really a board policy position at this point.
Thank you. So
Thank
given that guidance from our attorney, I would support a motion similar to what with the conditions Mr. Ukaili has discussed.
Thank you. Any other discussion? So, Mr. Rudge, I would offer a friendly amendment that there be a ninth condition that requires the removal of any ropes or cables between August 15th and May 15th, and during each evening when the camp's in session, to avoid any entanglement with wildlife. Are you amenable to that friendly amendment?
I'll allow it, Mr. Ukaili, if you feel strongly about it.
Thank you. All right, then can we have a second on Mr. Member Rudge's motion with the friendly amendment?
George Gerstle seconds
Thanks.
that motion with friendly amendment.
Any discussion? Okay, then I'll call the roll. Bill Walters,
Board Member Bill Walters, aye.
thank you. Board Member Rudge,
Scott Rudge, aye.
Board Member Gerstle,
George Crystal, aye.
and Board Member Kylie votes aye. So the variance is granted with the 9 conditions, the 8 from staff and the 1 that was added as a friendly amendment. With that, and thanks for participating. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
With that, does anybody have anything else before we close? Hearing none, I'll adjourn. Thanks, everybody.